I never imagined having to lay my own child to rest. It's the most contrary experience possible, positioning yourself next to the sleek wooden coffin containing your boy, observing as it's descended into the soil while you stay on the surface. Richard was just 38. I'm 62. This wasn't the way life was intended to unfold. A persistent April shower pattered down as we clustered beneath ebony umbrellas in Greenwood Cemetery. I remained isolated, divided from the other attendees by an intangible wall of sorrow that nobody dared to breach. Facing me was Amanda, my son's widow, her flawless cosmetics unaffected by any weeping, her dark Chanel outfit better suited to a social soiree than a burial. She had wed Richard scarcely 3 years before. Still, she had positioned herself as the focal point of this awful ritual, while I, who had nurtured him single-handedly after his dad's death, was shunted to the margins. Mrs. Thompson. A gentleman in a grave suit came toward me as the final guests started heading to their vehicles. I'm Jeffrey Palmer from Palmer Woodson and Hayes. I served as Richard's lawyer. The will reading is set for the residence in 1 hour. We need you there. At the residence right now? I couldn't mask my astonishment in my tone. Isn't that quite hasty? Mrs. Conrad, he started, employing Amanda's chosen last name before adjusting. Mrs. Thompson Conrad pushed strongly for us to move forward promptly. Naturally, she did. I had always puzzled over what my intelligent, compassionate boy found appealing in Amanda Conrad, with her fixation on online platforms and blatant drive for success. She had entered Richard's world like a precisely aimed projectile. Once a mannequin who evolved into a lifestyle mogul with an Instagram audience in the millions. In half a year after encountering him at a benefit event, she had relocated to his luxury apartment. In 12 months, they tied the knot. I had attempted to offer encouragement. Richard appeared content, and following the loss of his dad to malignancy 5 years prior, he merited any happiness available. Yet there was consistently a scheming glint in Amanda's gaze when she regarded my boy. A look that assessed his value in currency instead of affection. I'll attend, I informed the lawyer, pivoting to conceal the new sobs that loomed. By the moment I reached Richard and Amanda's luxury unit with views of Central Park, it was packed with individuals. Amanda's acquaintances from the style industry, Richard's professional contacts, some remote kin I hardly knew. The unit itself, 21,000 square feet of design mastery that Richard had acquired right before encountering Amanda, had shifted under her sway from my boy's cozy haven brimming with volumes to a barren display fit for a decor publication. The pieces were all stark edges and uneasy simplicity. The surfaces decorated with conceptual pieces that signaled only prestige. Eleanor, sweetheart. Amanda pecked the air near my face, her grin failing to touch her gaze. Thrilled you made it. Care for some white wine? No, thanks, I answered, fighting the impulse to brush my cheek where her mouth had scarcely brushed. As you wish, she dismissed with a shrug, shifting to welcome a lofty fellow in an Italian ensemble. Julian, you're here. I located a secluded spot, surveying the space with increasing unease. This didn't resemble a gathering after a burial. It resembled a professional mixer. Folks were chuckling, swapping contact info, toasting drinks, as though rejoicing instead of lamenting. Had they overlooked the reason for our assembly? That my boy, Amanda's spouse, had passed, his remains hardly settled in the earth? Richard perished in what authorities termed a maritime mishap near Maine's shoreline. He had ventured out on the vessel solo, which was atypical for him, and apparently tumbled over the side. His remains surfaced on land 2 days afterward. The inquiry continued, but officials thought he could have been intoxicated, though that didn't align for me. Richard seldom imbibed and never navigated alone. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeffrey Palmer's words pierced the buzz as he positioned himself by the stone hearth. May I have your focus, please? We're assembled to disclose the final testament of Richard Thomas Thompson. The area hushed, people claiming chairs or propping against surfaces. Amanda placed herself conspicuously in the middle of the biggest couch, tapping the seat next to her for Julian to sit. I stayed upright in my niche, abruptly fearful of what lay ahead. Following Mr. Thompson's directives, I'll make this concise, Palmer commenced, unfolding a hide binder. This represents his latest testament, endorsed and authenticated 4 months back. For months? That struck me as odd. Richard had forever been precise with his matters, refreshing his testament annually on his birth date. His most recent one was 8 months prior. What had triggered this alteration? To my spouse, Amanda Conrad Thompson, Palmer recited, I bequeath our main home at 721 Fifth Avenue, encompassing all fixtures and artwork inside. Amanda beamed as if obtaining precisely what she anticipated. I further bequeath to Amanda my majority ownership in Thompson Technologies, my vessel, Eleanor's Dream, and our leisure homes in the Hamptons and Aspen. Whispers spread across the space. This covered basically all of it. Richard had developed Thompson Technologies from a modest venture to a digital protection giant valued at billions. Those holdings by themselves signified immense riches. To my mother, Eleanor Thompson, I tensed, preparing myself. Might it be the coastal retreat in Cape Cod where we shared countless recollections? The assortment of initial print books we pursued jointly at sales globally? The classic vehicle his dad had cherished. I bequeath the attached article to be provided right after this testament's disclosure. Palmer delved into his binder and extracted a wrinkled envelope, clearly aged as if pocketed for a while. That's all? Amanda's tone rang out over the abruptly quiet area. The elderly woman receives an envelope. Oh, Richard, you clever fox. She chuckled, a ringing noise like shattering crystal. Others chimed in, her trendy companions, a number of Richard's fresher work allies, even Julian, who had his palm resting loosely on Amanda's leg in a manner that felt oddly personal for the day of a burial. Palmer neared me, unease clear on his features as he passed the envelope. Mrs. Thompson, it's okay, I responded reflexively, lifelong etiquette compelling courtesy amid my astonishment. Thank you. With all eyes on me, some smirking outright, I had no option but to unseal it immediately. My digits shook as I tore the flap, conscious of Amanda's hungry stare. Within was a solitary premium flight voucher to Lyon, France, linking to a modest locale named Saint Michel de Maurienne. The takeoff was planned for the next dawn. A getaway? Amanda exclaimed, sparking another wave of amusement. How considerate of Richard to dispatch you elsewhere, Eleanor. Maybe he understood you required solitude, distant, very distant. The malice was so blatant, so intentional, that I momentarily couldn't inhale. Richard, my astute, affectionate boy, had granted me solely a flight voucher to a spot unknown to me, while awarding all to a lady who scarcely paused until his remains were interred before deriding his mom. If there's no more, Mr. Palmer, I uttered, neatly refolding the voucher into the envelope. In fact, there is an additional clause, Palmer stated, appearing uneasy. Mr. Thompson indicated that if you opt not to utilize this voucher, Mrs. Thompson, any prospective additional provisions would be voided. Prospective provisions? Amanda scowled. What implies that? Regrettably, I can't elaborate more, Palmer answered. Those were Mr. Thompson's precise orders. Well, it scarcely signifies, Amanda gestured indifferently. Evidently, there's nothing further of worth. Richard assigned all to me. She rose, adjusting her high-end gown. I think this wraps up our affairs. Please, all, linger and honor Richard's existence. The servers have readied his preferred dishes. As the assembly resumed its unsuitable merriment, I departed undetected. The envelope gripped in my fist like the final fragile link to my boy. In the lift descending to the foyer, I at last permitted the sobs to flow, quiet heaving that rattled my frame as I rested against the reflective panel. Why, Richard? Why inflict this on me? What conceivable motive could you possess for directing me to France and allocating all to a woman who never genuinely cherished you? Back in my humble Upper West Side flat, the identical one I'd occupied since Richard's youth, I perched at my dining surface gazing at the flight voucher. Saint Michel de Maurienne held no significance for me. I'd visited France once, ages ago during university, but never this area. Richard and I had never conversed about it. He displayed no curiosity in that zone, yet he'd taken the effort to amend his testament expressly to guide me there, specifying that I must travel or relinquish some enigmatic prospective provisions. My practical nature urged ignoring it, consulting another legal expert, challenging the testament, battling for what ought to have been mine rightfully. But a profounder impulse, an unnameable gut feeling, urged me to rely on my boy once more. The following dawn, I gathered a lone bag, summoned a transport, and proceeded to JFK Airport. Whatever Richard had orchestrated, whatever lurked in Saint Michel de Maurienne, I would confront it. I owed him that. As the aircraft descended from U.S. territory, I peered at the fading shore, sensing as though I was abandoning not merely my residence, but the fragmented ruins of my former existence. Before me were solely enigmas, a mystery from an envelope, and a minuscule French hamlet I'd been unaware of until the day before. "I'm on my way, Richard," I murmured to the vapors. "Whatever you desire me to uncover, I'm arriving to seek it." The trek to Saint Michel de Maurienne was extended and bewildering. After touching down in Lyon, I maneuvered the French rail network with my outdated university French, ultimately climbing aboard a local locomotive that snaked into the Alps. Beyond the pain, the scenery evolved from undulating fields to striking peaks that appeared to graze the heavens. Small settlements adhered to slopes, with steeples and aged rock structures guarding over narrowing gorges as we ascended further. What am I pursuing here? The query echoed with every kilometer traversed. What could conceivably expect me in this distant French enclave that would clarify Richard's peculiar ultimate gift? When the locomotive arrived at the tiny depot in Saint Michel, my frame throbbed with fatigue and mourning. The platform was almost vacant in the waning afternoon glow, a handful of residents, a group with trekking equipment, and me. A 62-year-old American widow clasping a wrinkled envelope and hauling a valise that abruptly felt excessively burdensome. As the others scattered, I lingered hesitantly, pondering my next move. Richard's voucher had delivered me here, but offered no additional guidance, no hint on where to proceed or who to encounter. Then I spotted him, an aged gentleman in a sharp ebony suit and chauffeur's hat, displaying a placard with my name in refined lettering. Madam Eleanor Thompson. A surge of ease enveloped me as I neared him. "I'm Eleanor Thompson." The chauffeur, his visage etched by years, but his azure eyes strikingly vivid, examined me for an extended instant. Then, in English with an inflection, he uttered 5 words that halted my pulse. "Pierre has been anticipating eternally." Pierre. The term struck me like a corporeal strike, causing me to reel backward 1 pace. The chauffeur extended an arm to balance me, worry marking his traits. "Madam, are you ill?" "Pierre," I breathed, barely capable of shaping the syllable. "Pierre Beaumont?" The chauffeur affirmed with a nod, his demeanor gentling. "Oui, Monsieur Beaumont. He offers regrets for not greeting you personally, but he believed perhaps it might overwhelm after your lengthy voyage and fresh bereavement." Pierre Beaumont was living. Pierre Beaumont was present. Pierre Beaumont, the title I had entombed so profoundly in my soul that I had never voiced it in 4 decades. The individual I had adored with youthful fervor. The individual I had presumed deceased after that horrific evening in Paris. The individual who, if my abrupt, terrifying suspicions held, was Richard's actual sire. How? I succeeded in saying, my larynx tightening on the term. How did Richard locate him? The chauffeur's gaze expanded marginally. I believe Monsieur Beaumont should clarify, if you'll permit. He motioned to a glossy black Mercedes stationed close by. Dazed, I trailed him, permitting him to claim my valise and unlatch the vehicle door. As I settled into the plush seat, my thoughts dashed through reckonings I had evaded for ages. Richard had entered the world 7 months following my rushed union to Thomas Thompson. All presumed he arrived early, a frequent event. Solely I grasped the reality that he was conceived in a petite Paris flat with azure blinds and a vista of the Seine, with a French design pupil who had vowed me the universe. The chauffeur, who presented himself merely as Marcel, appeared to detect my desire for quiet as we departed the modest town, curving up a hill path lined by evergreen woods and stunning panoramas. In other situations, I might have been enchanted by the splendor encircling us. Presently, I scarcely perceived it through the haze of reminiscence and apprehension. "We're almost arrived, madam," Marcel remarked at last, as we veered onto a secluded lane indicated only by a graceful wrought iron barrier. Chateau Beaumont has belonged to the lineage for 12 eras, though Pierre has updated it substantially. Chateau Beaumont, the title evoked a recollection. A late-night exchange, bodies intertwined in inexpensive linen bedding. Pierre's tone fervent as he depicted the hereditary estate he would one day revive to its past splendor. I had giggled then, delighted by what I deemed adolescent daydream. Evidently, it had been no daydream whatsoever. As we navigated the ultimate curve, the chateau emerged, and I inhaled sharply despite my state. Constructed from amber rock that shimmered in the fading afternoon rays, it merged fortress from the Middle Ages with refined estate seamlessly. Stepped gardens tumbled down the incline beneath it, and past them, grape fields extended afar, their orderly lines forming designs over the terrain. The grape fields yield some of the region's top vintages, Marcel noted, evident satisfaction in his tone. Monsieur Beaumont is regarded as one of France's leading winemakers today. Naturally he was. Pierre had perpetually been ingenious, motivated, ardent about all he engaged. While I had withdrawn into a secure, limited existence in New York, he had evidently constructed a dominion here in his homeland's heights. The vehicle halted in a rounded drive before the chateau's enormous oak entrances before Marcel could circle to open my door. One entrance swung wide, and a lofty silhouette appeared. Moments decelerated, the instance solidifying with improbable sharpness, though his locks were now gray rather than ebony, though creases now charted his visage where once only smooth tawny complexion existed. I would have identified him anywhere. Pierre Beaumont, at 64, remained unmistakably the man I had cherished at 20. He remained completely motionless, observing me as I exited the vehicle on shaky limbs. Neither of us uttered a word. What could conceivably be expressed after 42 years of hush? What phrases could span the abyss of an existence endured separately? Of concealed truths and obscured facts. Eleanor, he articulated at last, my name on his lips still bearing the identical French cadence that had once accelerated my youthful pulse. Pierre. My voice resonated oddly to me, faint and winded. You're living. A gloom traversed his features. Yes, though for numerous years I thought you might not be. Before I could reply to this perplexing declaration, a surge of weariness and astonishment engulfed me. The surroundings slanted dangerously, obscurity invading my sight's borders. The final recollection was Pierre advancing swiftly, his limbs still robust despite the passage of time, capturing me before I could collapse. Upon regaining consciousness, I lay on a couch in what seemed a library. Shelves of tomes covering the walls, a large workstation near the pane, flames dancing in a rock fireplace. Despite the gentle spring climate, a cover had been draped over me, and someone had taken off my footwear. You're conscious, Pierre's tone emerged from close by. He occupied a hide armchair, regarding me with a fervor that made me desire to conceal and approach nearer at once. Marcel has departed to arrange a chamber for you. I believed maybe we ought to converse initially. I elevated gradually, my skull swirling with inquiries. Richard, I initiated, unable to tackle any other subject until I knew. Did he? Was he? Your offspring, Pierre stated tenderly, arrived to locate me 6 months past. He had uncovered certain health irregularities in a standard checkup that prompted him to doubt his lineage. Via one of those genetic heritage tests and some adept private detectives, he followed a hereditary link to me. So, it's accurate, I murmured, the verification of what I had already surmised impacting me with unexpected intensity. Richard was your child. Pierre affirmed with a nod, his gaze fixed on mine. Biologically, indeed, but in all ways that genuinely count. He was nurtured by you, and he paused. Your spouse Thomas passed 5 years back, I interjected mechanically. He never learned. I never revealed to him that Richard wasn't his. Richard clarified that. Pierre stood, proceeding to a cabinet where he dispensed 2 tumblers of golden fluid. He mentioned Thomas Thompson was a fine parent to him. He was, I verified, taking the tumbler Pierre presented. The brandy seared agreeably as I sipped modestly. He adored Richard as his own. We wed swiftly after my return from Paris, and Richard arrived 7 months later. All thought he was early, but you recognized. There was no blame in Pierre's inflection, only profound melancholy. You recognized he was mine, yet you never sought me. The injustice of this hit me like a smack. Seek you? I believed you were deceased, Pierre. After the mishap, your flatmate informed me you perished in the medical center. I was 20, expectant, solitary in an unfamiliar land. What was I expected to do? Pierre became utterly immobile. What mishap, Eleanor? The authentic bewilderment in his tone chilled me. The bike collision. 2 days prior to my departure from Paris, you were meant to encounter me at the bistro close to the Sorbonne, but you didn't appear. I visited your flat, and your flatmate Jean, told me you'd suffered a dreadful wreck, that you succumbed to your wounds. There was no collision, Pierre uttered gradually, his features shadowing. I was at the bistro at the precise hour we agreed. You never arrived. I lingered for hours. When I went to your lodging, they said you'd departed that morning, headed to America without notice. We gazed at each other across 4 decades of misapprehension, the reality emerging with dreadful lucidity. Jean-Luc. Pierre pronounced the name like an oath. He was enamored with you, though you never perceived. When I traveled to Marseille to see my ailing grandmother that weekend, he must have. He shook his head as if still incapable of accepting such treachery. He informed you I was deceased and informed me you had forsaken me. I concluded, the elements aligning. But why would he? To penalize us both, I suppose, Pierre stated darkly. He desired you, but you selected me. Instead of acknowledging that, he ensured neither could possess the other. The magnitude was nearly overwhelming to grasp. A envious youth's falsehood had reshaped 3 existences, mine, Pierre's, and most heartbreakingly Richard's, who matured ignorant of his genuine parent. All these years I breathed, tears swelling in my eyes. All these years squandered due to a deception. Pierre shifted to perch beside me on the couch, near but not contacting. When Richard located me, I didn't trust him initially. It appeared improbable. But then he displayed your image, and it was like encountering a specter. You resembled so much the Eleanor I recalled, merely gracefully aged. He grinned slightly. And Richard, he possessed my mother's gaze, my father's jaw. Once I beheld him, I knew he spoke truth. Why didn't he inform me he discovered you? I inquired, the wound raw among numerous other feelings. Why maintain secrecy? Pierre's features grew concerned. He intended to at first, but then he unearthed something that altered his intentions. Something regarding his spouse. Amanda, I uttered, the name sour on my lips. Yes, he engaged detectives to verify his ancestry, but they revealed something else altogether. Proof that Amanda was involved romantically with his corporate ally, Julian. Worse, they detected monetary discrepancies indicating the pair were diverting from Thompson Technologies, scheming to ultimately oust Richard from his own firm. Julian, the fellow who had sat adjacent to Amanda during the testament disclosure, his palm on her leg in that possessive fashion. The fragments were starting to form a design I resisted acknowledging. Richard's demise, I stated, my tone empty. The nautical incident. You don't think it was an incident whatsoever, do you? Pierre's hush was response sufficient. Pierre's hush validated my deepest dreads, surging over me in tides of terror. Richard's passing, which I'd been attempting to embrace as a sorrowful mishap, might have been far more malevolent. The authorities claimed he tumbled over the rail. I succeeded in saying, my tone scarcely audible, that he'd been consuming alcohol. Richard never consumed while boating, Pierre echoed, mirroring my own reflections from the burial. Never. He was exacting about precautions on the sea. It was among the initial details he shared about himself. My palms started quivering so fiercely that Pierre softly removed the brandy tumbler from me before it could overflow. Are you implying that Amanda, that she could have? I don't know, Pierre conceded, his features solemn. But Richard was fearful. The final occasion I conversed with him, 3 days prior to his death, he informed me he was assembling proof against Amanda and Julian, that he had uncovered shifts of firm funds to foreign accounts, that he aimed to challenge them once he had all documented. And then he perished. The phrases lingered between us, laden with suggestion. And then he perished, Pierre affirmed, out on the waves solo, which Richard told me he never did. He invariably brought a staff member or companion for security. I pressed my palms to my face, striving to maintain composure as this fresh actuality threatened to fragment me entirely. My boy, my astute, tender-hearted boy, might have been slain by his own spouse for wealth. The identical spouse who now commanded his whole estate, who had ridiculed me at his burial, who had already been publicly displaying her bond with Julian mere hours after we interred Richard. Why didn't he approach the authorities? I questioned, lowering my palms to regard Pierre. If he possessed proof of diversion, he desired undeniable verification first. And Pierre wavered. He was humiliated, I believe, ashamed that he had been so completely misled by a lady he believed cared for him. That at minimum resonated painfully. Richard had perpetually been reserved about his feelings, hesitant to display fragility. It was a characteristic he had inherited from his father, his true father, positioned before me now with the identical reserved demeanor I had witnessed so frequently on my boy's face. The voucher, I uttered abruptly, recalling the envelope that had guided me here. Richard's testament. He orchestrated this, didn't he? He sensed something might occur to him. Pierre affirmed with a nod, standing to fetch a dossier from his workstation. Richard approached me 4 months past, soon after uncovering Amanda's disloyalty. He modified his testament, assigning all apparent assets to her, the luxury unit, the vessel, the known holdings. He unveiled the dossier, extracting various papers. But he had been more cautious with his finances than anyone realized. The bulk of his real riches was concealed in ventures, estates, and accounts that Amanda and Julian were unaware of. He passed me the documents, which I identified instantly as legal forms. As I perused them, my respiration halted. They outlined a secondary testament, duly signed and verified, that opposed all announced at the luxury unit. This testament allocated the majority of Richard's fortune, a colossal sum that overshadowed even the substantial holdings Amanda had acquired, to a fund co-managed by me and Pierre. He devised a snare. I breathed, comprehension emerging as I read onward. He permitted them to assume they possessed all while truly safeguarding his authentic inheritance out of their grasp. Pierre concluded. Richard was ingenious, Eleanor. He understood that if Amanda suspected more existed, she would never cease hunting it. So he staged a show, the open testament disclosure, your seeming exclusion, the enigmatic voucher that all observed you accept. To divert her pursuit, I stated, the elements aligning. To convince her she had triumphed, while truly initiating his genuine scheme. Pierre's features softened with admiration and sorrow. The flight voucher was the core. If you employed it, if you reached me, it would trigger the secondary testament. If you had declined, all would truly have transferred to Amanda. I recalled Palmer's enigmatic remarks about prospective provisions that would be invalidated if I rejected the voucher. It had been a kind of trial. Would I depend on Richard once more, even when it appeared he had forsaken me? But why the concealment? Why not simply reveal to me about you, about the secondary testament? Richard claimed you were awful at deception, Pierre stated, a slight grin at his lips' edges. He worried if you knew the facts, Amanda might detect it in your expression, might sense something amiss. He desired her to trust utterly in her success. The notion of my boy devising all this, shielding me even while confronting unimaginable disloyalty, guaranteeing his true inheritance stayed protected, prompted new tears. There's additional, Pierre stated softly, pulling another form from the dossier. Richard left this for you. He requested I deliver it once you reached. With quivering digits, I took the sealed envelope, identifying Richard's script instantly. Tearing the seal, I unfolded multiple sheets filled with my boy's unique handwriting. My beloved mother, if you're perusing this, then 2 events have transpired. I am departed, and you have relied on me once more by pursuing my peculiar ultimate wish. I'm regretful for the open farce at the testament disclosure. I required Amanda to think she had succeeded totally. I needed her assurance and conceit to flourish completely without doubt that anything remained beyond her control. I located Pierre, my true father, through one of those DNA analysis services you always decline to attempt. I know my roots, Richard. I don't require a company to inform me. It turns out you were wise to be cautious, because what I uncovered guided me along a route I never foresaw. Initially, I was furious that you had concealed the truth from me. That fury prompted me to pursue Pierre without notifying you. But when I found him, when I observed in his features the identical traits I see in my reflection daily, that fury melted into comprehension. He described Paris, your rapid romance, the vicious trick that divided you. Neither bore fault. I was preparing to unite you, to mend this ancient injury. But then I uncovered what Amanda and Julian were executing, the firm funds they were draining, the schemes they were devising to eject me. And abruptly, I needed to exercise greater caution. I needed to defend what I had constructed, not merely for myself, but for you, for Pierre, for the inheritance that should have been ours forever. If I perish before resolving this legally, then you must presume the gravest. Rely on no one save Pierre and Marcel. They comprehend the next steps. The proof against Amanda and Julian is kept in the azure enameled container you presented me for my 16th birthday. I've concealed it where solely you would consider searching. Recall our scavenger games when I was young? The location where X invariably indicated the prize. I cherish you, Mom. I'm sorry for any distress this inflicts. But realize that in locating Pierre, I discovered a fragment of myself I never realized was absent. I hope eventually you might discover similar restoration I did. All my affection, Richard. I lowered the message, my sight obscured by tears. He realized I breathed. He realized something might befall him. Pierre extended tentatively and clasped my hand in his. His flesh was warm, the contact poignantly recognizable, despite the years since our last touch and now. Richard was attempting to shield everyone he treasured, he uttered quietly. He described you with such respect, Eleanor, such fondness. He desired us to have an opportunity to acquaint ourselves anew, not to revive what was forfeited necessarily, but to heal the scars from that distant falsehood. I regarded our linked hands, then upward at Pierre's features. In his traits, I could discern echoes of Richard, the contour of his eyes, the slant of his chin, the manner his forehead creased in focus. My boy had located his father, had known him for merely 6 brief months, and had still forged a tie robust enough to entrust him with this intricate scheme. The azure enameled box, I stated, drying my tears with my unoccupied hand. I know precisely where he would have stashed it. Where? Pierre questioned. X indicates the spot, I answered, a weak grin emerging despite my sorrow. The outdoor seat at the Cape Cod residence beneath the X-formed arbor, where I instructed him to recognize star patterns. It was our unique area, our location where all scavenger hunts concluded when he was a kid. Pierre's features intensified. We must reach that box before Amanda does. If it holds the proof Richard collected against her. She already possesses the Cape residence. I comprehended with a plummeting sensation. It was portion of what she acquired. She could discover it any time if she begins examining Richard's belongings. Then we must act swiftly, Pierre stated, standing and drawing me tenderly upright. Marcel can prepare the aircraft in an hour. The aircraft? I echoed, briefly disoriented. Richard's alternate aircraft, Pierre clarified with a modest grin. The one Amanda is ignorant of, one of numerous resources he concealed from her, including, I should note, a notable stake in this grape field, which now pertains to you and me. The disclosure hit me anew, the profundity of Richard's orchestration, the scope of his actual riches, the meticulous manner he had organized for retribution, even from the afterlife. We're returning to America? I inquired, still endeavoring to absorb all. We're going to obtain that proof, Pierre verified, his features firming with resolve. And then, Eleanor, we are going to ensure the individuals accountable for our boy's demise confront the repercussions of their deeds. Our boy, the term sent a tremor through me, mourning and acknowledgement, and something akin to potential, all interwoven. Whatever ensued, I would not confront it solo. The identical vicious falsehood that had divided us ages ago had unwittingly reunited us through the deeds of the son neither had adequately known. As we exited the library, the final beams of dusk lit the chateau in amber glow, projecting our silhouettes elongated across the antique rock flooring. Ahead were ambiguity, peril maybe, and the anguishing duty of seeking justice for Richard. But in that instant, with Pierre's hand still grasping mine, I sensed something I had not anticipated discovering in this secluded French nook: direction, and perhaps eventually tranquility. The Beaumont private aircraft was unlike any plane I'd previously traveled in. All supple hide and polished timber, with merely 8 opulent chairs and a compact but refined rest area at the rear. As we positioned for departure, I discovered myself wondering at this odd, fresh actuality where my boy had covertly possessed such luxuries, where Pierre Beaumont had emerged as one of France's richest winemakers, and where I, ordinary Eleanor Thompson, retired literature instructor turned widow, was abruptly immersed in a realm of exclusive flights and global plotting. The trip to Boston will require approximately 7 hours, Pierre described as Marcel, now disclosed as not merely a chauffeur but Pierre's reliable aide for over 3 decades, readied for takeoff. We ought to touch down early morning their time. And then? I questioned, still grappling to comprehend our rapidly formed strategy. Then we drive to Cape Cod as fast as feasible. Pierre's demeanor was stern. Ideally, Amanda is still in New York, too occupied relishing her fresh riches to tour the summer residence yet. I affirmed with a nod, my ideas surging forward. The box is stashed in a section under the outdoor seat. Richard and I constructed it jointly when he was 12, a hidden spot for his valuables. No one else is aware of it. Let's trust it remains so for a bit longer, Pierre whispered as the aircraft started rolling. As we climbed into the dimming heavens, I found myself examining Pierre's outline, observing the alterations time had imposed on the youth I had once adored so intensely. The years had treated him well, silver weaving through his formerly dark hair, lines carved at his eyes and mouth's corners that indicated mirth as much as maturity. He remained attractive in that uniquely French manner that had mesmerized me as a 20-year-old overseas. "You're gazing," he noted without pivoting, a trace of humor in his tone. "Apologies," I uttered, chagrined to be detected. "It's just unreal, everything." Now he did pivot, his shadowy eyes meeting mine. Truly, if anyone had informed me yesterday that I would be soaring to America with Eleanor Mackenzie. Thompson, I amended instinctively. Of course. A shade crossed his features. Thompson, Richard's father, the man who nurtured him. The discomfort of that fact settled between us. Thomas had been a decent person, a compassionate partner, a devoted dad to Richard. He had known from the start that the child wasn't his biologically, but had never once hurled that reality at me, even in our fiercest disputes. He had merely cherished Richard as his own, proud of each achievement, supportive through each difficulty. Thomas taught science in high school, I stated, feeling an abrupt need to recognize the man who had been my companion for over 30 years. He adored Richard fully. Never once made him feel anything less than completely desired. Completely cherished. Pierre affirmed with a nod, his demeanor softening. Richard praised him highly. Said he was tolerant, motivating, that he never urged too forcefully, but always trusted Richard could accomplish whatever he aimed for. That was Thomas, I concurred, my throat constricting with unforeseen feeling. He was a fine man. And you? Pierre inquired softly. Were you content with him, Eleanor? The query surprised me with its frankness. We had a solid union, easygoing, gentle. We were collaborators, companions. I paused, then resolved that after 4 decades, I owed him candor. We were not what you and I shared. But few ever encounter that sort of fervor, and fervor doesn't always construct a steady existence. No, Pierre concurred, a touch of melancholy in his grin. It does not. Though I would have attempted had I known you carried my child. The burden of what might have occurred lingered between us, a life shared, nurturing Richard as kin, perhaps additional offspring, a wholly different trajectory from those we had traversed apart. And you? I questioned, redirecting the inquiry to him. Did you ever wed? No, Pierre gazed out at the shadowing clouds beneath us. There were liaisons, naturally, some enduring several years, but marriage, it never seemed appropriate. He halted, then appended so faintly I nearly missed it. They were never you. Before I could reply to this astonishing confession, Marcel materialized from the flight deck. "We have a protected call from Mr. Palmer," he declared, handing Pierre a orbital phone. He indicates it's critical. Pierre accepted the device, activating speaker so I could listen. "Jeffrey, we're on a safe connection. Eleanor is with me. Thank heavens." Palmer's tone transmitted clearly despite the span. "You must hasten your schemes. Amanda and Julian visited the workplace today trying to enter Richard's private system. When they failed, they grew irritated. I overheard them reference the Cape residence, stating they needed to inspect the evidence spots first. My veins chilled. They're hunting for something. They suspect Richard held proof against them." "It seems so," Palmer verified. "And they've already departed for Cape Cod. They used the chopper about 3 hours past." Pierre and I swapped worried glances. "We're still at minimum 6 hours from Boston," he stated, reckoning quickly. "Plus another 2 to the Cape, even speeding maximally." "They'll arrive before us," I realized, despair flooding me. "They'll locate the box." "Perhaps not," Pierre stated, his thoughts evidently racing. "Jeffrey, can you dispatch someone to the residence? Generate some postponement. I've already sent the maintenance person with orders to report a water breach. Disable the primary supply. It should grant you a few hours while repairmen are summoned, but not much beyond that." "It will suffice," Pierre resolved. "We'll contact upon landing." After concluding the call, Pierre directed Marcel to seek approval to boost our velocity. Fuel concerns disregarded. Then he pivoted back to me, resolve carved in his traits. "We'll succeed, Eleanor. I vow." I wished I could match his certainty, but fear had lodged in my gut like a boulder. If Amanda and Julian uncovered Richard's proof before we could, not only would retribution for our boy be jeopardized, but Pierre and I might end up threatened too. Individuals ready to kill for millions would surely not waver to remove 2 more barriers. What if I commenced, then stumbled, the notion too horrific to express? What if they uncover it first? Pierre completed for me, interpreting my terror. Then we shift to backup strategies. Richard was comprehensive, Eleanor. He wouldn't have positioned all his proof in one site. "How can you be certain?" I questioned. "You only knew him for 6 months." Pierre's demeanor gentled. "Because he was my offspring, and evidently he inherited my inclination to ready for every scenario." He extended across the passage dividing our chairs and took my hand. "And because he was your offspring, which means he was both ingenious and precise." The straightforward assurance in his words stabilized me. He was correct. Richard had never been reckless. Even as a youth, his endeavors were thorough. If he had gone to the trouble of crafting a secondary hidden testament, of uniting Pierre and me, of arranging this elaborate posthumous scheme, then he would have protected the proof in various manners. "I wish I'd known," I uttered suddenly, the remorse overpowering me, "about you surviving, about Richard locating you. I wish I could have witnessed you together even once." Pierre's fingers tightened on mine. "He captured our initial encounter," he stated quietly. "Positioned his phone on the surface between us, said he wanted to record the moment. I have it preserved. When this concludes, when Richard has retribution, I'll display it to you." The idea of viewing that instant, my boy meeting his natural father for the first time, brought new tears. What had Richard experienced facing the man whose traits he carried? What had Pierre felt, suddenly confronted with the grown son he never knew existed? So much wasted time, so many robbed moments, and at the core, the vicious falsehood told by a jealous youth 4 decades past that had reshaped all our paths. "We should slumber," Pierre proposed tenderly. "The clash ahead may demand all our vigor." He was right, though I doubted rest would arrive easily with my mind churning. Still, I tilted my chair and shut my eyes, Richard's message secured in my pocket. Whatever awaited at the Cape residence, I would confront it for my boy, for the facts, for the retribution he had meticulously planned but not survived to witness, and perhaps, I confessed to myself as fatigue finally drew me to oblivion, for the opportunity to uncover what might still linger between me and the man who had been my initial love, the man who was now my unforeseen partner in this oddest of voyages. Boston welcomed us with a gloomy morning, low overcast, constant mist, and a cold that penetrated my coat as we descended the aircraft's steps. A glossy black SUV awaited on the runway, the operator holding a canopy and a severe expression. Mr. Beaumont, he acknowledged as we neared. Mrs. Thompson, we must rush. Within the transport, the operator, who introduced himself solely as Roberts, updated us as we traversed the dawn congestion, leaving the metropolis. Mr. Palmer contacted again half an hour past. The plumbing diversion purchased some time, but Amanda and Julian reached the Cape residence 4 hours ago. They released the maintenance person once the water problem was fixed. Have they uncovered anything? Pierre asked keenly. Roberts shook his head. Unclear. The protection setup Richard installed permits us to observe the estate's boundary, but not the inside. We know they're still present, but not their activities. I closed my eyes momentarily, envisioning the Cape Cod residence where Richard and I had passed so many seasons. It was smaller than the Manhattan luxury unit, more restrained in its extravagance, but infinitely more intimate. Richard had adored that residence, the aged wooden exterior, the broad platform facing the sea, the yard where we had devoted endless hours jointly. They'll examine the residence first, I stated with conviction. Richard's workspace, his sleeping area. They won't consider the yard until they've depleted the obvious locations. Then we may still possess time, Pierre remarked, glancing at his timepiece. How much further until we reach? About 90 minutes in this jam, Roberts responded, navigating adeptly through the crowded roadway. Less if it eases. Pierre affirmed, then turned to me. We should ready for every outcome, Eleanor. If Amanda and Julian are there upon our arrival, what is our tactic? I hadn't pondered this. In my imagination, we would somehow enter unnoticed, recover the box, and flee with the proof. The prospect of potentially facing my son's widow and her paramour, my boy's possible slayers, sent a chill along my back. I don't know, I confessed. I'm a former literature instructor, Pierre. I don't know how to face killers. His hand covered mine briefly. You are far more than that. You are Richard's mother. You are stronger than you realize. He turned to Roberts. We require a diversion if they're still there. Something to lure them from the estate briefly. Roberts affirmed. Already organized. A shipment of wrongly directed furnishings is timed to arrive at the adjacent residence at exactly noon. They'll create sufficient uproar about the mix-up that anyone nearby will be pulled to check. I wondered at the proficiency of this effort, the exclusive aircraft, the awaiting vehicle, Eleanor. Pierre's tone pulled me from my musings. Before we reach, there's something you should learn. His expression was disturbed. Marcel got a call from our associates in France while you slumbered on the aircraft. They've been tracking Amanda's monetary dealings as Richard asked. And substantial amounts have been shifting from Richard's accounts, the ones Amanda now oversees, to foreign sites. But more alarming is this. He handed me a device showing what seemed a real estate ad. She's listed the Manhattan luxury unit for sale, the Cape residence too. She's converting everything to liquid as fast as possible. She's preparing to flee, I realized. Once she is all turned to cash, she and Julian could vanish. Pierre verified. Which implies they are indeed culpable of what Richard doubted. My morning solidified into something firmer, more concentrated. This lady had not only possibly slain my boy, but was now obliterating every vestige of his existence, transforming his inheritance into untrackable funds. The notion was intolerable. We need to halt her, I stated, my tone steadier than anticipated. Not just for retribution, but for Richard. Pierre affirmed, something like endorsement flickering in his gaze. Yes, for Richard. As we neared the detour to the private lane leading to the summer residence, Roberts slowed the SUV, veering onto a hidden side trail. Their transport is still on the grounds, he reported, checking a small gadget. We'll pause here until the diversion reaches, then advance on foot via the rear trail. The rear trail was a slim path through the sands that led straight to the yard, a route Richard and I had frequently taken for our dawn strolls to the shore. That it would now function as our stealthy entry to recover proof against my boy's killers seemed a dreadful distortion of those pure memories. At exactly noon, Roberts received an alert on his device. The shipment is arriving now. Prepare. From our spot, we could barely see the neighboring grounds where a big vehicle had stopped. Workers and outfits began unloading a large quantity of furnishings, disputing loudly with the perplexed owner. As expected, the disturbance soon attracted notice from our target residents. Through optics, Roberts confirmed that both Amanda and Julian had come out onto the platform to observe the spectacle next door. Now, he stated simply. Pierre and I slipped from the SUV, following Roberts down the known sandy path that wound through shore vegetation and sparse evergreens. The shower had reduced to a light fog, but the earth was still moist, our steps fortunately muted on the soft ground. When the residents came into sight, my heart tightened at viewing it, so unaltered externally, yet now the setting of a desperate hunt for proof by the very individuals who had betrayed Richard. We hunkered behind a sandhill, watching as Amanda and Julian stood on the platform, gesturing and discussing the noisy shipment adjacent. They'll be occupied for 10 minutes maximum, Roberts cautioned. We must act fast. I guided the way around the estate's edge to the yard on the distant side, a private area enclosed by high bushes that obstructed views from both the residents and nearby properties. In the middle stood the wrought iron seat beneath an X-shaped arbor draped in ascending blooms, our special place where Richard and I had devoted countless evenings gazing at stars. There, I breathed, indicating the seat. The section is integrated into the cement foundation. You have to push the third blue motif from the left to trigger the latch. Pierre affirmed, and we advanced stealthily, constantly glancing toward the residence. The yard was thankfully vacant, though indications of recent disruption, crushed petals, a shifted yard figure suggested Amanda and Julian had already started searching here. Kneeling by the seat, I found the ornamental iron bloom on the foundation, a decoration that appeared purely aesthetic but was actually a complex catch. I pressed it firmly, hearing the gratifying snap as the concealed section unlocked. A small tray extended from the cement, revealing the azure enameled box, exactly where Richard had assured it would be. You located it, Pierre exhaled, relief clear in his tone. They haven't found the concealment spot, I verified, carefully raising the box. It was weightier than I recalled, roughly the dimensions of a thick tome. Its exterior still immaculate despite years in the hidden section. We need to depart, Roberts pressed, his focus locked on the residents. They're returning inside. Clutching the box to my torso, I stood, only to stiffen at the distinct sound of the yard gate catch opening behind us. Well, Amanda's icy tone cut through the foggy air. Look who chose to participate after all. I pivoted slowly, the azure enameled box still pressed against my chest. Amanda positioned at the yard gate, Julian directly behind her. The elegant burial attire was absent, replaced by relaxed opulence, soft wool top, fitted denim, footwear that likely cost more than my monthly income. Her fair hair was drawn back in a smooth tail, her demeanor one of entertained astonishment. Eleanor, she drawled, stepping fully into the yard. What a charming shock. And you've brought companions. Her gaze flicked to Pierre, then to Roberts, narrowing slightly. Trespassing is a grave offense, you know, especially when the estate is mine. This residence belonged to Richard, I stated, my tone steadier than I felt. A spot he treasured, a spot where he was joyful. And now it belongs to me, Amanda responded with a strained grin. Along with everything else Richard possessed. Peculiar how bequests function, isn't it? Julian shifted to stand beside her, his hand resting loosely in the pocket of his costly jacket, a stance that somehow appeared more menacing than relaxed. He was taller than I remembered from the burial, his features attractive in a predatory manner that chilled my skin. What's in the container, Eleanor? He inquired, his tone misleadingly soft. Something precious, I presume, given your secretive little mission to recover it. Pierre moved subtly, placing himself between me and the duo. Mrs. Thompson was collecting personal belongings bequeathed to her by her boy, he stated, his inflection more evident under tension. Belongings expressly omitted from the primary holdings. Amanda chuckled, the sound like fracturing glass. And who precisely are you? Eleanor's male acquaintance? I didn't realize care facilities permitted excursions for romantic pursuits. My name is Pierre Beaumont, he answered with poise. I am Richard's father. The declaration landed like a bodily impact. Amanda's meticulously maintained expression of derisive dominance wavered. Authentic shock supplanting it briefly. That's impossible, she retorted, recovering swiftly. Richard's father perished years ago. Thomas whatever. Thomas Thompson was the man who raised me. A fresh voice spoke from behind them, prompting Amanda and Julian to whirl around. But he wasn't my natural father. Richard stood in the yard entrance, very much alive. My knees almost gave way. The box slipped from my suddenly limp fingers, only Pierre's swift reflexes preventing it from hitting the ground. I stared at the vision before me, my boy, whom I had interred barely a week prior, now positioned just steps away, living and intact. Richard, I breathed, unable to trust my vision, my mind racing to comprehend what I beheld. "Hello, Mom," he stated, his known grin shaded with melancholy. "I'm so regretful for what I subjected you to. It was the soul method." Amanda had turned ashen, one hand clutching Julian's arm as if to balance herself. This is impossible. You're deceased. We viewed your remains. Did you?" Richard questioned, stepping fully into the yard. "Or did you view a body identified as mine after 2 days in the sea? A body that necessitated a sealed coffin burial due to the state of the corpse?" Julian's hand emerged from his pocket, and I glimpsed the metallic shine of a firearm before Robert smoothly intervened, disarming him with a rapid, expert motion that indicated specialized preparation. "I wouldn't," Robert stated quietly, securing the armament. "The estate is presently encircled by federal operatives. This discussion is being documented as proof." My mind was still laboring to process Richard's revival as he crossed the yard to hug me. He felt substantial, genuine, his known aroma surrounding me as he held me firmly. "I'm so regretful, Mom," he murmured against my hair. "I couldn't inform you. It wasn't secure. I needed everyone to believe I was truly deceased, especially Amanda and Julian. Their response to my passing was the ultimate proof we required." "I don't comprehend," I stated, withdrawing to search his face, the face I thought I'd never behold again in this existence. "The burial, the corpse, an unfortunate, unidentified man who matched my general appearance," Richard explained gravely. "Discovered 2 days after I allegedly went over the side. The coroner was part of the effort. She fabricated the identification, noting it as confirmed via dental data." "Effort," I repeated, still stunned. Pierre placed a stabilizing hand on my shoulder. "Richard contacted me 6 months ago, as I told you. What I didn't tell you is that after verifying I was his expression hardened, and eventually, when that proved too challenging, how to remove me completely." "You have no evidence of any of this," Amanda snarled, her lovely features twisted with loathing. "Nothing that would hold in tribunal." Richard grinned thinly. "That's where you're mistaken. The azure-enameled box my mother just recovered contains drives with duplicates of every damning message, text, and monetary deal. But more crucially, it contains the monitoring tools I installed throughout our home after discovering your liaison with Julian. Tools that captured your direct talks about having me eliminated." "That's unlawful monitoring," Julian snapped, his legal instincts surfacing even in crisis. "Inadmissible." "Perhaps in a standard criminal process," agreed a new voice as a distinguished elder man in a suit entered the yard. "But when it's part of an approved FBI effort investigating business spying and plot to commit homicide, the guidelines are somewhat altered." "Agent Donovan," Richard introduced him, the head on my case. Amanda's perfect composure finally shattered entirely. "This is ridiculous. You faked your own demise to entrap us. No one will accept this mad tale." "They'll accept the proof," Agent Donovan replied calmly, "which is considerable and becoming more incriminating daily. Your reactions to Richard's passing have been especially revealing. The rapidity with which you proceeded to sell off assets, the foreign shifts, the rushed listings for the estates, not the behaviors of a mourning widow." As if signaled, extra operatives appeared, officially detaining Amanda and Julian. I observed in stunned silence as they were escorted away, Amanda's angry claims fading as they left the yard. Left alone with Richard and Pierre, I found myself shaking, the built-up shock, relief, bewilderment, and fatigue of the past week overwhelming me simultaneously. Richard led me to the seat, sitting beside me while Pierre stood guardedly nearby. "I know this is overpowering," Richard stated gently. And I can't adequately apologize for subjecting you to the agony of believing I was deceased. But I needed everyone to believe it. Truly believe it. If Amanda had suspected I lived, she would have vanished with everything she could convert before we could construct a case against her. The testament, I stated, fragments beginning to align. The open disclosure, the envelope, directing me to France, it was all part of this scheme. Richard affirmed. I needed to get you securely away from Amanda while creating the impression that you'd been excluded. If she thought you had nothing, that you posed no danger, she wouldn't concern herself with you. And I needed you to locate Pierre, to grasp the complete truth about your history, about mine. I looked up at Pierre, who had been observing us with a look of deep emotion. You knew Richard lived all this time? Yes, he confessed. It was challenging to sustain the ruse with you, Eleanor, but essential for Richard's protection. And the box, I questioned, turning back to Richard, was it truly essential or just another element of the pretense? Both, Richard answered. It holds actual proof, but we already possessed copies. What we needed was to catch Amanda and Julian in the act of hunting for it. Additional confirmation of their guilt. They've been dismantling the residence for days, searching for anything incriminating I might have left. It was almost too much to absorb, the intricate ruse, the cross-border effort, my boy alive after I had grieved him so profoundly. And yet, beneath the confusion and lingering pain of being uninformed, a deep relief was rooting. Richard was alive. Nothing else mattered as profoundly as that miraculous fact. I have so many inquiries, I stated, reaching to touch his face, reassuring myself of his substance. I know, he recognized. And I promised to address all of them. But first, he glanced at Pierre, some unspoken exchange passing between them. I think it's time the three of us had a proper discussion about the past, about the future, about the time we've forfeited and the time we might still share together. As the operatives completed their tasks around us, securing the grounds and gathering final proof, I sat between the two men who shared the same distinctive gaze, the same resolute jawline, my boy and his father. Both restored to me from what I had believed was eternal loss. Beyond the yard barriers, justice was finally emerging for those who had conspired against Richard. But here in this small haven where I had once taught my boy to recognize star patterns, something else was commencing, the careful, tentative rebuilding of a family fractured 4 decades ago by a single spiteful falsehood. We shifted from the yard to the residence once the operatives had finished securing proof and escorting Amanda and Julian away. The Cape residence, a place brimming with so many recollections, felt altered now, changed by recent occurrences into something both known and alien. Richard guided us to the sun-filled space overlooking the waves, where the three of us sat in uncomfortable silence for several moments, the weight of our joint history and individual pasts suspended between us. I don't know where to start, I finally uttered, looking from Richard to Pierre and back. I interred you. I grieved you. And all this time. I know, Mom. Richard reached for my hand. Asking you to endure that sorrow was the toughest part of this entire effort. If there had been any alternative path, was there? I interjected, needing to comprehend. Was there truly no other choice? Richard exchanged looks with Pierre before responding. We evaluated options for weeks, but Amanda and Julian were cautious. They used coded communications, foreign accounts, intermediaries for their most condemning discussions. We needed something dramatic to force them into openness, to make them believe they'd triumphed so they would grow careless. And my supposed demise was the only tool powerful enough, he continued. Once they believed I was gone, they began acting quickly to secure holdings, sell properties, shift funds, all actions that created a traceable record we could pursue. Pierre leaned forward, his expression sincere. Eleanor, Richard resisted this scheme at first. He was deeply worried about the pain it would cause you. It was Agent Donovan who proposed involving you in the aftermath effort. Richard explained he felt directing you to Pierre would serve several purposes, getting you safely distant from Amanda, who might have viewed you as a potential risk if you began probing questions, while also providing the chance to reunite you with Pierre after all these years. So the testament disclosure, the envelope, the flight voucher, all performance for Amanda's benefit. Richard affirmed. We needed to establish a public view that you had been cut out. Left with nothing but a mysterious voucher. It made you seem harmless to Amanda's schemes while actually setting our real scheme in motion. I inhaled deeply, trying to process everything. The relief of finding Richard alive clashed with the hurt of being kept unaware, of enduring unnecessary sorrow. The body, I uttered suddenly, a troubling thought occurring to me. You said it was an unidentified man. Someone's child is in your tomb, Richard. Someone who deserves to be acknowledged, to be grieved by their own kin. Richard's expression softened. There is no body, Mom. The coffin was weighted, but vacant. Once this effort is complete, we'll discover that an error was made in the identification. The coroner's fabricated report will be corrected. No one is missing their opportunity to properly inter a loved one. This at least was a comfort. The thought of another mother being denied the chance to mourn her boy properly had been momentarily unbearable. So what happens now? I questioned, looking between them. Now, Pierre uttered gently, we have decisions to make, all of us. Richard stood, moving to the pane to gaze at the sea. Legally, I'll stay deceased until the case against Amanda and Julian is fully readied. That could be weeks, possibly months. My revival will be explained as part of a federal protection operation, which is basically what it has been. And after that? I pressed. After that, he turned back to face us. I don't know precisely. Thompson Technologies will need restructuring. Many board members were involved in Julian's plot, or at least deliberately blind. The properties can be reclaimed. The assets frozen during the probe released. He paused, then continued more softly. But more importantly, I think the three of us have 4 decades of lost time to consider. Bonds to reconstruct or build for the first time, if that's what you both desire. Pierre and I exchanged glances, decades of division and misunderstanding stretching between us like a gulf that suddenly seemed both immense and bridgeable. I would like that, Pierre uttered simply. I have lived most of my existence with a void where family should have been. To discover not only that Eleanor survived, but that I had a son, it has been life-changing. However complicated, however difficult the path forward might be, I want to traverse it. They both looked at me, waiting. My heart felt overflowing, torn between joy at Richard's revival and uncertainty about what Pierre's return to my life might signify. I need time, I confessed. This is overwhelming. A week ago, I was a grieving mother planning the rest of my life in solitude. Now, my son lives. My past has resurfaced in ways I never envisioned possible, and everything I thought I knew has been overturned. Of course, Richard uttered quickly. There's no hurry, no pressure. But I continued, finding my way to the truth as I spoke. I would also like to try, to see what might be possible now between all of us. Relief washed over both their faces, so similar in expression that it struck me anew how clearly Richard had inherited Pierre's features, his mannerisms. How had I not seen it before, this evident reflection of his biological father? Perhaps, Pierre suggested cautiously, we might begin simply with stories. There are 4 decades to account for, after all. And so we did. As afternoon faded into evening, we remained in that sunroom, sharing the lives we had lived apart. Pierre told us of building his vineyard from almost nothing, of the early struggles and eventual triumphs. I spoke of raising Richard, of teaching high school English, of my life with Thomas. And Richard filled in the gaps of his own life, the parts one had witnessed, but not fully understood, the recent years when his business success had led him to Amanda, and ultimately to the discovery of his true paternity. Somewhere in those hours of conversation, the awkwardness began to dissolve. We ordered delivery from the local seafood spot Richard and I had visited during our summers here, eating from paper boxes while continuing to talk. Agent Donovan called twice with updates. Amanda and Julian were securely detained. The evidence from the azure enameled box was being processed. The case was advancing smoothly. As night fell, Richard excused himself to take a longer call from the FBI, leaving Pierre and me alone for the first time since the shocking revelation in the garden. This is not how I envisioned our reunion, Pierre uttered softly after a moment of silence. In all my dreams over the years, and there were many, I never pictured anything like this. You imagined reuniting with me? I couldn't conceal my surprise. after all this time?" He smiled, the expression transforming his face to one I recognized from my memories. "Eleanor, I never stopped hoping I might find you again someday. I searched in the early years, but Eleanor Mackenzie seemed to have disappeared from existence because she became Eleanor Thompson, I realized. And I never used social media, never had much public presence. A ghost I couldn't locate," Pierre agreed, "until our son brought us together again." Our son. The words still sounded strange, miraculous. Richard was Pierre's son, a truth hidden for decades, but now undeniable as I looked at the two of them together. "What do you want from this, Pierre?" I asked directly. From me, from Richard, from this unexpected second chance? He considered the question seriously. "I want whatever is possible, Eleanor. Whatever you and Richard are willing to share. I have no expectations, no demands, only gratitude for this opportunity, however it unfolds." His humility touched me. The passionate young man I had loved had matured into a thoughtful, patient adult who understood that relationships couldn't be forced, that trust and connection required time. "One day at a time," then I suggested, offering a tentative smile. "One day at a time," he agreed, returning the smile with one of his own. Outside, waves crashed against the shore in the familiar rhythm that had been the soundtrack to so many summers here. Inside, three people connected by blood and circumstance began the delicate process of becoming something like a family, unusual, unexpected, but perhaps all the more precious for the long journey that had brought us to this point. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm that had accompanied our arrival completely gone. I woke early, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar bedroom, until I remembered where I was. The Cape House, Richard alive, Pierre returned from the past, everything changed in ways I was still struggling to comprehend. I found myself drawn to the kitchen, where decades of habit led me to brew coffee and search for ingredients to make Richard's favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes, a tradition from his childhood summers here. The simple, familiar task grounded me amid the swirling uncertainty of everything else. "Some things never change." Richard's voice came from the doorway, startling me. "First morning at the Cape House, Mom makes pancakes." I turned to find my son alive, whole, smiling, leaning against the frame. The sight still seemed miraculous, impossible. I wasn't sure what else to do, I admitted. Normal seems scarce right now. He crossed the room to embrace me, and I held on perhaps a moment longer than needed, still requiring the physical reassurance of his presence. "I'm sorry," he said as we separated, "for everything you endured. Agent Donovan showed me the footage from the burial. Seeing you there, believing I was gone," his voice cracked slightly. "It was harder than I expected." "They recorded the burial?" "Part of building the case. They needed to document Amanda's behavior, her interactions with Julian. The thought of federal operatives surveilling my grief felt intrusive, unsettling. This whole effort, it's been planned for months, hasn't it?" "Well, I knew nothing." Richard nodded, taking a seat at the counter as I returned to mixing the batter. "Since January, that's when I first found discrepancies in the company accounts. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. When I traced them back to shell companies linked to Julian, I realized something serious was underway. "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked the question that had been haunting me since yesterday's revelations. "Why keep me uninformed through all of this?" "Initially, I planned to," he said, his expression troubled. "But then I discovered something that changed everything." "What?" "That Amanda and Julian had hired someone to monitor you, to track your movements, your calls. They were concerned you might notice something off in my behavior as I investigated them." I nearly dropped the mixing bowl. "They were spying on me?" "But why?" "Because you know me better than anyone," Richard explained. "You've always been able to tell when something's troubling me, when I'm holding back. They worried you might realize I was suspicious of them, might encourage me to dig deeper." The violation was profound, strangers watching me, tracking my activities, all because Amanda saw me as a potential threat to her schemes. "That's when I knew I couldn't involve you," Richard continued. "It would have put you at risk if they realized you knew what they were planning." He didn't need to finish the thought. If Amanda and Julian were willing to murder Richard for his money, they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone else who threatened their plans. But you involved Pierre, I noted, unable to keep a hint of hurt from my voice as I poured the first pancakes onto the griddle. Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was complicated. I found him initially because of the DNA test, before I discovered what Amanda and Julian were planning. Once I did realize the danger, I was already in contact with him, and he was safely in France, beyond their reach or knowledge. You trusted him immediately? A stranger? Not immediately, no. Richard smiled faintly. But there was something about him, something familiar in a way I couldn't explain at first. And he had resources, connections that proved valuable to the operation, the private jet, secure communications, trusted personnel like Marcel and Roberts. As if summoned by his name, Pierre appeared in the kitchen doorway, hesitating as if uncertain of his welcome in this domestic scene. "Good morning," he said, his accent more pronounced with sleep. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I replied, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. I'm making pancakes." "A tradition," Richard tells me, Pierre said as he poured a cup. "One of many I have missed." The simple acknowledgement of all he had missed, all we had both missed through our decades of separation, hung in the air between us. "There will be new traditions," Richard suggested carefully. "Different ones perhaps, but still meaningful." Pierre nodded, taking a seat beside Richard at the counter. The resemblance between them was even more striking in the morning light. The same profile, the same way of holding their coffee cups, the same thoughtful pause before speaking. Agent Donovan called, Pierre informed us. "Amanda and Julian are being formally charged today. The evidence from the azure enameled box has been examined and appears quite condemning. Recordings of them explicitly discussing plans to eliminate Richard, financial records of the stolen funds, even communication." I began plating the pancakes, the familiar ritual at odds with the extraordinary conversation. "And now, how long before you can officially return from the dead?" "A few weeks, most likely," Richard replied. "There are legal considerations, protocols for witness protection cases, and we need to ensure the charges against Amanda and Julian are fully secured before I emerge." "And in the meantime?" I asked, setting plates before them both. "In the meantime," Pierre said carefully, "I was hoping you might consider visiting Chateau Beaumont again, both of you. There is much of Richard's heritage, his French heritage, that he has yet to discover." And perhaps, he hesitated, then continued with deliberate casualness, "perhaps it might be a good place for all of us to become better acquainted, away from the complications here." The invitation hung in the air, not just a suggestion for a visit, but an opening to something more. A chance to explore what might still exist between Pierre and me after all these years. An opportunity for Richard to connect with his biological father's world, his history, his legacy. "I'd like that," Richard said, looking between us. Once the immediate legal matters are settled, the vineyard was extraordinary. "I'd like to see more of it, understand more about that part of my history." They both looked at me, waiting. I busied myself with the remaining batter, buying time to consider. The thought of returning to France, of spending extended time with Pierre at his chateau, brought a complex mixture of feelings: anticipation, anxiety, a flutter of something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'll think about it," I said finally, not ready to commit but unwilling to refuse outright. "There's still so much to process here first." Pierre nodded, accepting my hesitation without pressing. "Of course, there is no rush, Eleanor. Only an open invitation, whenever you might wish to accept it." As we ate breakfast together, this strange new family unit formed from decades-old secrets and recent revelations, I found myself studying both men surreptitiously: my son, whom I had raised and loved for 38 years, his father, whom I had loved briefly but intensely in my youth. The connections between them were unmistakable now that I knew to look for them, genetic echoes that had always been there, unrecognized until now. Whatever came next, whether a visit to France, a gradual rebuilding of relationships, or paths that ultimately diverged again, at least it would be founded on truth rather than lies. The deception that had separated Pierre and me 4 decades ago, and the more recent deceptions orchestrated by Amanda and Julian, would no longer shape our lives. For now, that knowledge and the miraculous reality of Richard alive across the table was enough. 3 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Richard remained officially deceased while the case against Amanda and Julian solidified. The evidence from the azure enameled box proved even more damning than anticipated, not only recordings of their explicit plans to murder Richard, but documentation of systematic embezzlement stretching back nearly 2 years. Agent Donovan kept us updated on the proceedings, which moved with surprising speed once Amanda's carefully constructed facade cracked under interrogation. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against her, she turned on Julian, offering testimony in exchange for a reduced sentence. Julian, in turn, implicated several board members who had knowingly assisted in the financial fraud. The scandal expanded daily, making headlines in business publications and eventually mainstream news. Through it all, the three of us remained at the Cape House, sheltered from the media storm by federal agents who maintained a security perimeter around the property. It was a peculiar time, part family reunion, part witness protection, part emotional reckoning. As we navigated our complex connections, Pierre and I settled into a cautious friendship, neither pushing for more, but both aware of the unresolved feelings that sometimes surfaced in quiet moments. We took long walks on the beach, comparing the lives we had lived separately, filling in 4 decades of history in fragmented conversations that often circled back to Richard. "He has your intelligence," Pierre observed one afternoon as we watched Richard on a video call with federal prosecutors, his quick mind dissecting complex financial transactions with remarkable clarity. "And your moral compass." He could have simply divorced Amanda when he discovered her affair, walked away with his fortune intact. Instead, he risked everything to ensure justice was served. "He has your determination," I countered. "Once he sets a course, nothing deters him. And your eyes, your hands, even the way you both gesture when explaining something complicated." These moments of shared pride in our son bridged the decades of separation, creating a tentative foundation for whatever might come next. Richard, for his part, seemed to enjoy this unexpected time with both his parents. He shared stories from his childhood that I had almost forgotten, asked Pierre about family history in France, and occasionally orchestrated situations where Pierre and I found ourselves alone together, his matchmaking intentions transparent but oddly touching. "You know what he's doing," I said to Pierre one evening after Richard had suddenly remembered an urgent call he needed to make, leaving us alone on the deck with a bottle of wine from the Beaumont vineyard. "Of course," Pierre replied with a small smile. "He is not subtle. Does it bother you?" Pierre considered the question, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass thoughtfully. "That our son wishes to see us happy? No. That he perhaps has overly romantic notions about rekindling a 40-year-old love affair? Perhaps a little. We're different people now," I agreed. "The Eleanor and Pierre who fell in love in Paris don't exist anymore." "No, they don't," he acknowledged. "But perhaps the people we have become might find their own connection if given the chance. Different, but no less meaningful for being built on experience rather than youthful passion." His directness took me by surprise, though it shouldn't have. Pierre had always possessed a refreshing honesty, an ability to speak truth without artifice. "Is that what you want?" I asked, equally direct. "I want the opportunity to find out," he replied simply. "No expectations, no pressure, just time to discover who we are to each other now. Beyond Richard's parents, beyond our shared past." Before I could respond, Richard reappeared, his expression unusually serious. "Agent Donovan just called. The prosecutors have reached plea agreements with both Amanda and Julian. The case is essentially closed." "What does that mean for you?" I asked, sensing the weight behind his announcement. "It means," he said, taking a seat between us, "that my revival has been scheduled for next week, a press conference explaining that my death was staged as part of a federal operation to catch embezzlers and would-be murderers." "And after that?" Pierre prompted gently. Richard took a deep breath. "After that, I need to rebuild. The company will require extensive reorganization. The board will need new members. Trust will need to be restored with investors, clients, employees." He paused, then continued more hesitantly. "I've been thinking about what comes next personally as well, about what matters most after coming so close to losing everything." "And what conclusions have you reached?" I asked, recognizing the thoughtful expression he wore when making important decisions. That life is too short for missed opportunities and unspoken truths. He looked between us. I've decided to accept Pierre's invitation to spend time at Chateau Beaumont, not just a visit, but an extended stay. Perhaps 6 months. I stared at him, surprised. 6 months? What about the company? I can handle most aspects remotely, with occasional trips back to New York as needed. And frankly, after everything that's happened, some distance from Thompson Technologies might be healthy for me and for the organization. He took both our hands, creating a physical connection between the three of us. I'd like you to join me, Mom, to come to France, to spend time getting to know the other half of my heritage, to see if there might be a place for you there as well, in whatever capacity feels right. The invitation hung in the air, freighted with meaning beyond the simple words. This wasn't just about a trip to France, about exploring Richard's paternal heritage. It was about the possibility of something new between Pierre and me, something unrushed, unpressured, but potentially profound. You don't need to decide immediately, Pierre added, seeing my hesitation. The invitation remains open, whenever you might feel ready. Later that night, alone in my room, I found myself drawn to the window overlooking the moonlit beach where Richard and I had spent so many summer evenings. The familiar landscape seemed different now, transformed by recent revelations and resurrections. Everything had changed. Richard was not just my son, but Pierre's as well. He carried a heritage I had denied him knowledge of for 38 years, a connection to a culture and family history that was rightfully his to claim. And Pierre was no longer a painful memory of love lost, but a living, breathing man whose life had taken its own path parallel to mine, only to converge again through our son. Could there still be something between us after all this time? Not the rekindling. Are you sure about this? Richard asked the night before our departure, finding me on the deck of the Cape House where I sat watching the sunset one last time. 6 months is a long commitment. I'm sure, I replied, surprising myself with how true it felt. I spent 4 decades wondering what happened to Pierre. I spent a week believing I had lost you forever. A few months exploring what might still be possible for us, all of us, feels like a gift rather than a sacrifice. He settled into the chair beside me, his expression thoughtful. And if nothing comes of it, if you and Pierre decide there's no future there? Then I'll have had the opportunity to know for certain, rather than always wondering what might have been, I said simply. And I'll have spent time with my son in a beautiful place, learning about half of his heritage that I never allowed him to explore. Richard smiled, reaching over to squeeze my hand. For what it's worth, I think there's still something there between you and Pierre. I see it when you look at each other, even if neither of you is ready to admit it yet. We'll see, I said noncommittally, though his words triggered a flutter of something hopeful in my chest. We have time now, time we never thought we'd have. The journey to France was considerably more comfortable than my first frantic trip after the funeral. Pierre's private jet provided space to rest, to think, to prepare myself for whatever lay ahead. Richard spent much of the flight working on his laptop, reorganizing Thompson Technologies remotely, while I alternated between reading and gazing out at the endless blue sky, marveling at the strange path that had led me here. When we landed in Lyon, Marcel was waiting with the same black Mercedes, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile at the sight of Richard and me together. "Welcome back, Madame Thompson," he said with a formal bow that couldn't quite conceal his genuine pleasure. "Monsieur Beaumont is awaiting your arrival at the chateau." The drive through the French countryside was different this time, the landscape no longer obscured by grief and shock, the beauty of the Alps fully visible in the clear autumn light. Richard pointed out landmarks he had noticed during his previous visit, his excitement building as we approached Saint-Michel-de-Maurienne. "The vineyard stretches for nearly 300 acres, he told me, leaning forward in his seat. Some of the vines are over a century old. Pierre's grandfather started with just 50 acres, and each generation has expanded it. The Beaumont wines have won international awards for decades." His pride in this newly discovered heritage was palpable, touching something deep in my heart. For all my efforts to give Richard everything, there had been this essential piece of his identity that I had withheld, not maliciously, but through my own unresolved grief and misunderstanding. As we rounded the final bend, Chateau Beaumont came into view, golden in the late afternoon sun, just as it had been on my first arrival. This time, however, Pierre stood waiting at the entrance, his tall figure immediately recognizable even at a distance. The car had barely stopped before Richard was out, striding forward to embrace his father with an ease that spoke of the connection they had already formed during their brief time together. I followed more slowly, taking in the tableau they created, so clearly related, so comfortable together despite the decades of separation. "Eleanor," Pierre said as I approached, his smile warming his entire face. "Welcome back." "Thank you for having us," I replied, suddenly shy in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Come," he gestured toward the massive oak doors. "Everything is prepared. I thought perhaps a simple dinner tonight after your journey. Tomorrow, if you feel up to it, I can begin showing you the vineyard, the winery, the village." The interior of the chateau was as impressive as I remembered: soaring ceilings, ancient stone walls softened by elegant furnishings, windows framing spectacular mountain views. But now, without the shock and confusion of my first visit, I noticed other details: family photos arranged on a side table, books in multiple languages filling built-in shelves, fresh flowers in crystal vases throughout the entry hall. "This is home," Pierre said simply, following my gaze. "Not just a historic property or a business headquarters. This is where generations of Beaumonts have lived, loved, raised their families." The implications of his words hung in the air between us, that this could be Richard's heritage too, perhaps in some way not yet defined, mine as well. "It's beautiful," I said honestly. "I can see why you fought so hard to restore it, to build the vineyard into what it is today." "Let me show you to your rooms," he offered. "You'll want to rest before dinner." The suite he had prepared for me was on the chateau's second floor, with windows overlooking the vineyards that stretched toward distant mountains. Everything had been thoughtfully arranged: fresh flowers on the dressing table, a selection of books beside the bed, a carafe of water and basket of local fruit on a small table by the window. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," Pierre said from the doorway. "If you need anything at all, you have only to ask." "It's perfect," I assured him, moving to the window to take in the spectacular view. "More than perfect." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'm glad you came, Eleanor. Whatever happens or doesn't happen between us, I'm grateful for this time." Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me to settle into this new space, this new chapter of my life that had begun with a crumpled envelope and a plane ticket I never expected to use. Later, as the three of us gathered for dinner in a cozy room that felt more like a family dining area than the formal spaces I had anticipated, I watched Richard and Pierre discussing vineyard operations, vintage variations, the challenges and rewards of winemaking, their shared passion, their similar mannerisms, the easy rapport they had established in such a short time. It was everything I had denied them for decades, everything I had never allowed myself to imagine might be possible. To new beginnings, Pierre proposed as we raised our glasses, filled appropriately with Beaumont wine from the year Richard was born, a vintage Pierre had apparently saved for just such an occasion. "To truth," Richard added, his gaze moving meaningfully between us. "To family," I completed, the word encompassing everything we had lost, everything we had found, everything we might yet become. As we clinked glasses, I felt something settle within me, a rightness, a sense of pieces finally falling into their proper places after decades of misalignment. Whatever grew from this time in France, whether friendship, romance, or simply a healed understanding between three people connected by blood and circumstance, it would be authentic in a way our separate lives had not been. The crumpled envelope that had seemed like such a cruel joke at the funeral had actually contained the greatest gift imaginable: not just a plane ticket to France, but a passage to truth, to reconciliation, to possibilities I had long since abandoned. And for that, despite all the pain and deception that had preceded it, I found myself profoundly grateful.